Hi everybody, if we could get our seats, we'll get going here in just a minute.
I guess.
And then we'll have you.
Oh, yes, I just didn't know if you wanted.
No, you're perfect. Is this working?
Perfect.
Hello, you guys. Well, thank you very much for being here. Welcome to the Hyperledger Seattle Meetup, and we have some new folks here today. So, can I get a raise of hands for somebody that is new to the meetup? Awesome. Yeah. My name is Marissa Inaroni with Warm Solutions, but I organize the Hyperledger Seattle Meetup. I'm very excited to have you all here today and have Paige Krieger from IBM. Big thanks to IBM for sponsoring our snacks and water today. Keep us hydrated in this weather. Logistics, men's bathroom that way, ladies' bathroom that way. It's a full circle so you don't get lost. Doors do lock at 6, so don't leave anything in here, otherwise there's no getting it back. I would like to take a moment to thank Create 33 for allowing us to use the space and turn it over to Erica Jordan from Create 33 to tell us a little bit more about this beautiful location.
Thank you. First and foremost, welcome. There are a couple of familiar faces, but otherwise, maybe it's a couple of people's first time in Create 33. Maybe another raise their hands. All right. Oh, good to know that most of you have been here. That's awesome. Just a few. Yeah, just a friendly reminder for everyone. We're a founder center here, so we provide access and resources for technology founders. And we love to host events and produce events ourselves and really bring programming that helps people build and scale companies. Because we know that there are a lot of resources out there, but sometimes, it's really finding who is finding the right programming for people who are scaling fast, like venture-backed, or anyone who's looking to build on innovative and new technologies. The other piece of that is obviously we have this beautiful space that folks can come and work out of. We also do a lot of connections in terms of customers, capital, and talent, and so that's some other pieces that we like to do to support technology founders. We do have a couple membership options, one of which is a builder membership, which is $50 a month, and that gives you unlimited access to programming, 5 days of use of space, and then 10 hours of conference room usage. So for example, if you have a really big meeting, I know that a lot of people love to use our boardroom, one of which is one of our boardrooms, one of which is just behind you, has a great view, makes you stand up a little taller in front of, like investors or really important customers. So, I'll let you take it back. I don't know how much to do, but welcome. Thank you so much for coming, and please reach out to me, Erica at create33.co if you have any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, well, it is my great pleasure to introduce Paige Krieger to talk about the competitive landscape of enterprise blockchain. Thank you, Paige. Yay.
Oh, no, it's all good, it's all good. Okay, so first of all, thank you guys all for coming. I prefer to sit just because I want this to be more of an open conversation. You'll realize that one of the first things we're doing is kind of a group activity, and not to take you back to childhood, but also to do so because I feel like blockchain is a space where imagination is still much needed and very warranted, and so when it comes to kind of switching back to taking off the corporate lens of basically thinking about all of these platforms as IBM versus AWS versus Oracle, I'd rather just look at them, I guess, without those lenses and just think about the platform and what they have to offer, and then what really is needed despite who's going to be offering it, what's needed in the market to make all of this happen. So a little bit about me. I'm from Dallas, originally from California, but went to school out in Texas and stayed there. It's not nearly as beautiful as this. It's a lot hotter than this most of the year. And I do have family up here, so I come up here a decent amount and love it. But as I was mentioning to a few of you, it's very interesting to look at the competitive landscape, but also the geographic landscape of blockchain and enterprise blockchain, because in different parts of the United States even, startups are focused on different industries. There's different levels of regulation. There's different mentality around change. So it's really fun to come up here and experience all the innovation that's happening and the speed at which it happens. Whereas sometimes where I am and in other parts of the country, it's a little bit slower or a little bit more focused on different industries. So all of your input's greatly appreciated. I am excited to see you guys here and hope that you get a lot out of this discussion. With that, we will jump into the evolution of the competitive landscape of enterprise blockchain. And forgive me because this landscape changes pretty much every 3 seconds. So if any of this is outdated, I won't be offended if you correct me or update me. I'd love to know. So we're going to start with 2 truths and a lie. Basically, if you just separate into, I was going to say 4 groups, but it's a little hard with the way we're sitting. So just form some groups and pick a protocol. And if you don't know what I'm referencing, just rely on your group members and you'll figure it out. And then come up with 2 truths about that protocol and a lie or a common misconception. And then we will end up calling out what that lie is and hopefully getting some myths busted. So we'll take like 5 minutes or less to do this, and I think it'll be a good way to start the conversation.
We're talking about the
so you evaluate all the different Hyperledger platforms. None of them are completely trying to work with the stage. None of them are
Is that a protocol or is that
so you're talking about I think this thing is up he said was
how we do software, how the network talks to each other. Based on how
Wall Street forward like
we all talk to each other.
Figure out there's a lot of shots that you take place. Even if I can't the one good one I have do those search tricks, and then I can just, if I can listen to that traffic flowing well, I can probably even reduce one person person and then I can get in order to figure that out. So then, I'll encourage you that as a little bit too. But I mean, from a normal business context, in practice, so they're very consistent money it's possible. How much
how many zeros No, it's actually you're working on monitoring energy fluctuations to look for malware. And
2 more minutes.
Actual hardware level, right? Basically sandboxed processing that has synthetic transactions, random noise, and don't see the fluctuations. It's crazy stuff.
Killed me here a little bit, for me that was interesting. But I don't know if there's one central thing. Oh, but we should also come with two truths and a lie. So we kind of get exposed to the lies. Truths would be, well, one truth would be you take an awful lot of action to get to that point.
Think about it.
30 seconds.
On today, it's not because I don't have fellowship.
Yeah, it'd be expensive until we
Sometimes they don't even need it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the second truth would be. I think it's the second truth
Technically, time's up, but I can give you one more minute if you're struggling. The lie should be the easiest part. You just make it up.
So Paige, where from California are you from?
Southern, so Orange County area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's where I grew up and my
grew up in
parents
SoCal.
still are. Okay.
So farther north.
Yeah. No, I lived in Reno, Nevada for a couple of years too, because my dad's job. So I can kind of consider myself NorCal maybe, but I like to say Tahoe, not Reno.
There you go.
I was like right on the border, so
Beautiful.
it's so pretty. But it's just when you say Reno, people are like, oh, like Vegas. I'm like, it's further from Orange County's closer to Vegas than Reno is to Vegas. So yeah, that's just a fun fact.
Yeah, it is a fun fact.
Okay, when we're ready, you're ready? Okay, if you're not ready, just make something up, no judgment zone. And if you guys want to take a seat too, there's spots in case you don't want to stand. Oh, we're coming up to the front. I love it. No, please do, I love it. Yes. Yeah.
Paige, let's go.
Good to see you again.
Absolutely.
Dragon Chain, yes? Oh, I know. I just saw
Saw
it.
it.
I actually remember, but we'll say that I read it too. Okay, we have Philip?
Yes.
Philip? Okay. Yep. Philip from Dragon Chain is going to tell us his two truths and a lie. Let's wait till he finishes all three, and then we'll call out the lie.
Okay. So, I'm Philip with Dragon Chain. Everyone knows Dragon Chain, I imagine? Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. So we're local. We're based in Bellevue. We're a hybrid blockchain, so we're not private like Hyperledger. We're not public like Ethereum. We're right in the middle. So you keep your business data private and you expose to a public network what you want to expose. It's a hash of your data, so you have proof of existence of your data on your private node. So we use time as a consensus mechanism. So the transactions are validated by our community, and it's based on the time that they keep the tokens in their wallet. So if they don't have tokens of that, they don't have them for a while, they won't be able to validate transactions. So you need tokens, and you have to keep them for a while in your wallet. Okay, so that's our consensus mechanism. And in terms of lie, it's hard to say, but it's
Oh wait, you're telling us which one's the lie?
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I should have explained that.
No,
Okay.
one of the lines was already in there.
Oh, so
Yeah,
those
yeah,
were all
yeah.
three of them. I see.
No,
I was-
that's not true. So,
I'm so
still have to think
confused.
about the line. But I'm going to add a few other things.
What's
so
the
we use
misconception, maybe, if you don't want to do a lie?
What? No, I keep on going. So in terms of development, everything is based on languages that most people know. It's Python, Java, Node, and all these guys, C#. So you can develop your smart contracts in languages that everyone knows. It's not, you don't have to worry about Solidity or other languages that are pretty limited. The problem is it's very expensive to run these nodes. So the monthly cost is pretty high. So it's about $5 per transaction, and that's what we try to bring down. I know it's pretty impressive in terms of price, but that's going to come down in the future. What else can I tell about Dragon Chain? It's
Time's up.
no.
Just kidding. But if you
No, that's it.
have you said a lie yet? Can we pick out a lie, or
I
was
still
all of
have to do a
that
line.
true?
Still have to do a line.
Okay. We're gonna. We gotta keep our
So we gotta
activities
be-
time boxed.
Yeah, no, one of the things that we have as well, we have interchain as capability, so we have, out of our blockchain, you can communicate to any blockchain out there. Because we think that today we don't know what the best blockchain is gonna be tomorrow. So you can have the killer blockchain in supply chain, you can have the killer blockchain in identity. And because of that, you have the flexibility to connect to that future blockchain in the future. So you're not limited, you don't have to put all your eggs in that basket of a blockchain today that is probably the best today, but tomorrow it might be outdated. So with Dragon Chain, you have the flexibility to connect to any blockchain that will be developed in the future that will be best in breed for a specific application.
Okay.
Okay, that could be the line.
I was just gonna say, that one seems like the most
So I think I have a
all-encompassing
few
statement,
more
so we'll go with that
than
one.
two truths and a line, but it makes it more complicated. So let's go. Where was the line?
That last statement, if it's gonna work with any chain, that is a pretty bold one, so we'll stay tuned on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do we go? Where do we go now?
Who's next?
We follow. We don't.
I
No,
thought
no.
that was okay, does anyone else disagree that last statement, if there wasn't truly a lie in there,
No,
what would be the
no.
most likely to be
No,
a
no.
lie?
They have to find the line, no?
Yes,
Okay.
but
That's what she just
I-
asked.
yes.
So what was it?
Probably agree with
That
her.
it works.
We'll work with every single possible blockchain.
Is that a lie?
You guys will be interoperable with the main ones probably, but not every single.
Every single. It's not a lie. It's true.
All right, only time will tell.
I've got one thing.
No.
Fill up, everyone.
There's
No.
also some don't allow-
This is-
One could be built.
All right,
that
who's
doesn't
up
allow
next?
third parties.
What?
You could build them that doesn't
Even
allow-
private. We have interchain with private. Sorry, sorry, I have to
What?
come back because apparently there's confusion. The lie was the cost.
Oh, so it's not $5
No,
per
absolutely
transaction?
not.
Okay.
So I thought it would be discussed this now, but apparently we don't.
We just
That was
don't
the
have
lie.
enough time, or else we would.
Now
But
we know
thank
what to ask you
you.
later.
Yes, now we know what to ask you about what is the cost. Thank you. All about the cost here.
So I teased our group into considering this contrarian thought that if we consider Hyperledger as a permissioned, private and confidential protocol, our lie is it's not entirely private and permissioned and confidential. And so consider this, consider that if I'm in Wall Street and I'm doing a really, really big deal with lots and lots of zeros behind it, it may be worthwhile a bad actor figuring out how they can tap into some communications, watch the wire, and see, hey, there's a lot of activity going on here between Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, and that wasn't going on yesterday. And if I can keep plugged into those wires, I can listen to enough of that chatter that I can do sort of an Alan Turing type thing. I can eventually learn, okay, they must be using this sort of encryption. So I can start to decrypt it, or I can learn a little bit more about the data. And eventually, with enough effort, I can sort of take myself into a sort of a national security type scenario, and I can use those techniques. Now, the truth is, in a practical business sense, it's probably unlikely that I'm going to go to those great lengths, because probably can't put enough zeros on the end. So on the other hand, I've got a truth and I've got a lie, and I need to fit them into the business context. So that's my short story.
Yes, I'm not sure that I gathered both of the truths, but I think a lie about Hyperledger is that it always is private, because it can be public, but it's permissioned. Would anyone else agree with that? And I'm totally not offended if you don't. I just know that that's often a misconception, that private is the same thing as permissioned, and it can be public but permissioned.
I can really go to a lot of lengths to try and make it private, but maybe I can, if I really, really put a lot of effort into it, I can bust the privacy.
And that's the lie.
That's the lie.
Okay. We'll go with that. Thank you, Clive. That's fine.
This is really not going the way you thought.
No, I really think it's two truths and a lie. It's supposed to be like, I have a fish, I broke my arm. I was gonna say, let's see how, but I appreciate the creativity. See if Seth can nail it.
All right, don't let us down.
Fingers crossed. We stuck with Bitcoin, try and keep it simple. So, yeah, 3 things. 1, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer network. Generally speaking, it has increased in value since its inception, and it is the most decentralized network out of any protocol.
It's not decentralized, that's nothing to do.
Correct.
What is the
Yeah.
decentralized?
I don't know what is the most decentralized, but
It's not Bitcoin.
it's definitely not big. I mean, there's most of the mining is controlled by miners in China, so it's like even the sovereign. Like this is something I love to get into because we talk about the permission versus permissionless. People tend to have this misconception that permission chains are inherently less decentralized because they're controlled by. They can be controlled by organizations, or people are assigned the rights to run the node, but Sovereign has 70 nodes with equal weight. Bitcoin has about 5 that control a majority of the hashing power. So even this permission network is technically more decentralized than a lot of permissionless networks.
Love it. Thank you. How it's done. All right, do we have one more group? I think we did. Do we have a volunteer from that group? Or did that group not exist?
I know we're in that now.
Oh, are we missing?
Our guy left.
Oh. Nope, Philip, if we have time at the end, I'll show the stage again. I also noticed I didn't say anything about my role, and that was just because I was too excited to get to the game. So while we're waiting, if we are waiting for someone.
No, let's just move.
No? Okay, well, I was just going to say I'm a digital engagement program manager, which is a mouthful. Basically, I do product management, I do customer experience improvement, and I talk to the salespeople to figure out who the users of the platform are and what they like and don't like about it so we can make it better. Anyway, so what are we going to talk about? It won't be all games, but we will talk about how we're defining enterprise blockchain for the sake of this conversation, because if we tried to talk about the whole enterprise landscape, we would be here till 2 in the morning. The evolution to date and just kind of what it looks like from a variety of sources, not just IBM, don't worry, and why permission blockchain has been what a lot of these enterprise corporations have gone toward, and some of the key players, their current initiatives, and then research predictions for the future, whether we agree with those or not. And then a little activity at the end around tokenization. So Philip, you'll have another moment in the spotlight. Just stay tuned. Okay, so to start, for enterprise blockchain today, we're going to work with or talk about for-profit companies operating anywhere in the world with 1,000 plus employees and 500 million in revenue. And like I said, just because if we were to consider it more broadly, it would take forever. So forgive me for having a narrow scope, but hopefully we're all level set there.
Does the for-profit dimension imply something?
Not necessarily. It was just specifying that if for some reason there was a nonprofit, I guess, spearheaded initiative, that it's most likely wasn't taken into account when doing this research. But
Because like government sometimes have large enterprises but aren't necessarily for profit.
exactly, yeah. So it's just, these are more like the for-profit. You'll see I kind of outlined like the top 4 we're going to look into and discuss, but it's good call out. So if we're looking at evolution to date, I thought that excuse me, this chart was really unique just because not only does it show the past 2 years up until this July, but it maps out the enterprise activity versus Bitcoin activity. And as you can see, there's a lot more fluctuation in Bitcoin activity, whereas enterprise has been essentially a steady increase, with some of the specific projects being the Starbucks Bean to Cup launch, Food Trust on the IBM side, and I mean with Facebook's Libra announcement, which we're not going to talk too much about because it's such a controversial topic. But just looking at how, regardless of the cryptocurrency market, the enterprise blockchain market has experienced steady growth. So I know that my colleague Kurt in the back had another interesting observation, if you would like to share it, when we were talking about this chart.
Yeah, we looked to the left in 2017. There was this feel in the meetups, in these conferences, that crypto was on one side of the room, like you were at a high school dance where the girls were on one side and the boys were on the other, and you had enterprise on the other side. 2018, the crypto winter helped us realize there's an interdependence, right? That we will be better together and growing. And in 2019, you just see it starting to take off. It's almost a great handshake with what happened.
Thanks. Better than I could have said it. This is just another look. I think that it's important to note that Microsoft was first to market. IBM followed shortly after, but then you look at 2018 and all of a sudden everybody's jumping in. And so it's definitely gotten more complex if you fast forward to 2019, but this is just kind of looking back and showing that because there's more competition, the quality of blockchain as a service is obviously improving, and there's just a lot more development capabilities and a lot more interoperability, and the more players that continue to join, my prediction is that the better that's going to get. But these are both just to kind of set the stage, and I think it'll be interesting to see how many more large corporations we see jump into this mix.
So, can I?
Yeah, of course.
So you didn't have Salesforce on that. Is there a reason you don't?
So theirs came out, I believe, this year. So that one stopped at 2018, and we'll touch on the first half 2019 initiatives, and Salesforce being one of them. But if we're looking at things that are in production, theirs is not supposed to be on the market until 2020.
Okay.
So we don't really know how it's going to perform just yet, but that's a good call out. So looking back at just kind of IBM's provenance, pun intended, we're going back to when we started with the Open Blockchain project, and then we contributed all this code that then helped found the Hyperledger Fabric project. And it's really interesting to note that in December 2016, we said we have over 400 client engagements, and while that's true, if you look at the amount that were actually successful, we've definitely been able to hone in on what works and what doesn't over time. And coming to November 2018, you have hybrid multi-cloud networks, and then just this past June, and I guess we should fast forward to July and look at the acquisition of Red Hat, that now our platform can run on OpenShift. And so that enables it to be compatible with all different clouds. So basically, like I said, the same trend of interoperability, of improving blockchain as a service model, and really just looking at where we started, and the fact that we've stuck with Hyperledger through and through, I think is important. And we still stand by Hyperledger, and it's not just Fabric. There's a slide later on that talks about how open is IBM Blockchain Platform. That might surprise some of you.
So you want us to hold questions or?
No, I mean, I feel like as long as we're doing okay on time right now, if we get a little bit closer, then we'll have to hold until the end, but go ahead.
One question.
Yeah.
So is there any thought to include other blockchains as part of the idea focusing on that, or is it just a commitment totally made up behind Hyperledger?
No, so initially that was, I mean, if you talk to someone in 2016, that would have been their answer, that yes, we are Hyperledger Fabric only. But because of this whole shift toward interoperability and the need for hybrid blockchains, we are partnering with a bunch of different platforms and protocols. We're working closely with Hedera. We're working closely with really different organizations that aren't necessarily true blockchains, but are also just distributed ledger technology providers. And we're also venturing into kind of the stablecoin space. And when it comes to the tokenization, a lot of times that can be better done on something other than Hyperledger Fabric, at least right now. So we are part of the Token Taxonomy Initiative that I'll touch on. We are part of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. There's a lot of movement going on, so we are not set in stone. Yeah. Oh, so looking at this Deloitte survey, I thought it was really interesting once again, comparing 2018 to 2019. You can see that although the overall attitudes have strengthened and there's more advantages in diversification, with that comes more barriers. And I think the most interesting one was that it increased from, let's see, 43 to 53% that it's critical that it's in their top 5 strategic priorities. So it's not just a thought, it's not just a good idea, it's a strategic priority. And then you look at kind of the comparison here that shows that 43% see blockchain is overhyped still, which is up from last year. So it's a double-edged sword. You have the firm believers that are seeing the benefits and people still doubting and getting more and more sick of hearing about it, ideally none of which are us, but it's still, I think, important to call out that it's not all sunshine and roses. And just the fact that it's maturing, that's, I think, just a natural cycle to have more non-believers and more diversification of the barriers to entry. So this kind of leads into a lot of what the rest of our conversation is going to center around, which is blockchain models, whether it's private blockchain, which in this case they were defining as internal to your company, so that's good to note, and then permissioned public integration of multiple chains, which I think shouldn't be its own category, but that's just my opinion. Same with consortium, but that just shows that like even a corporation like Deloitte is kind of not sure how to categorize these different blockchain models because there's so many. So I think it's unique to point out that most companies are starting internally. I think that's just the risk factor. IBM did that too. We started with our IGF, so our basically our funding arm or our loan and funding arm, our finance arm of the organization, and we freed up $400 million in capital, in cash flow, excuse me. And so we tried out our blockchain platform before we even released it, and that seems to still be the case with most companies. But I think that this consortium bar will continue to grow, and that entering as part of a group effort will become more and more popular as the number of consortiums continue to pop up.
Sorry,
Yeah.
So you guys had a return, you guys used the blockchain internally to save that amount of money?
Freed up that much cash flow that was tied up in disputes.
Gotcha.
Yes, sorry, I should have clarified that a bit more. But that was just something where I kind of say whenever people are like, oh, we want to partner with IBM Blockchain, and I always ask, oh, like, have you used the platform? And people are like, no, and I'm like, okay, so you want to resell something that you've never used. And I think that right there just exhibits like the hype and the wanting to be a part of the movement without actually knowing what goes into it. So when we're looking at consortiums, or consortia I should say, I think this layout of looking at them from some are focused on tech development, some are focused on standards, and some are focused on specific projects is a good distinction to make when you're considering what the landscape looks like. So you have things that are focused on tech development, like R3, like Hyperledger working groups. You have the standards defining groups like the Token Taxonomy Initiative, and then specific projects like Food Trust or Trade Lens for IBM's perspective that a lot of people have heard about, but they don't necessarily know what went on behind the scenes with the standards defining aspect and the tech development aspect. These have to come first before these project-based, I guess, consortia can start to form, and that's something where people want to just see ROI and proof of these projects, but they're not going to see it until all of this goes into play first. So that's just a side note, but I think separating consortia is something that needs to be done more often. So I might be blocking this, and I apologize if I am, but why permission over permissionless historically for enterprises? The throughput. We were talking a little bit about mining and a little bit about cost per transaction and how much energy it can take up and the processing power. And so that's always a concern for these larger enterprises that are wanting to do thousands of transactions per second, but can't do so with some of the protocols and blockchain platforms that are out there. Interoperability, the fact that Hyperledger Sawtooth extended its functionality to the Ethereum chain, the fact that I have a screenshot later in the deck on, there was a Yahoo News article about Ethereum being the first to join Hyperledger, the first public blockchain, I should say, to join Hyperledger. Just there's a lot more to come there. And transaction data confidentiality, just like we were talking about, if you're working on Wall Street and have this big deal, you want to be confident that there's not going to be bad actors, and if for some reason there was, that the people in the network are going to be able to call that out and stop it before they get any value out of it. And then the protocol governance, that's interesting because of the corporate liability perspective. I never really thought about that, but when it's non-permission, there's a lot more objectivity involved. And I guess just looking at fast finality and fund source verification, that kind of is getting too deep in my opinion. I think that these top 4 are really what enterprises are considering when they're picking what protocol they're going to use. So these are the 4 that, at least from my experience and from what you've probably seen a lot of in the news about, are like the key enterprise players that have been in the game the longest. When I first started this role that I'm in now back in April, my first task was to go and set up a network on each of these platforms. I won't name names, but some were easier than others. One I never even got access to, probably because I used a corporate domain and the person looked me up on LinkedIn and asked why I wanted access to their platform, which was just a really unique exchange. But it doesn't matter, it was just the idea that if we're putting these things out to developers who are new to the space or really seasoned, it's all about the experience, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that all of these have offerings on Hyperledger. So that's kind of why, for the sake of this group and for the sake of the conversation, I looked into these 4. Questions? I thought someone had one. Okay.
Quick question. So all of those 4 platforms there, they all offer Fabric, do they?
Yes. At least Fabric. Some of them have other capabilities that either haven't been released yet or aren't as built out, but they're all leaning on Fabric, at least for right now. So with this landscape overview, you can kind of see that, yes, we talked about types of consortia, but then you look at frameworks, and I always misuse protocols and frameworks. I interchange them, and I don't think they should be interchangeable, but it's a bad habit. Platforms, there's more options by the day, and solutions are just these more easily consumed industry-focused engagements. But then you have the services piece. So if you can't do it in-house, oh, by the way, we have all these different players who are trying to do it for you. So I think this is kind of just a cool layout, and if anyone has comments. Corda is always hard for me. That's why it's in between platforms and frameworks, but open to any opinions on this.
How do you define frameworks?
So frameworks, it used to say protocols, but then the more that I thought about it, I switched it to frameworks.
Oh, okay.
So if that helps, I think, like I said, for some people it's interchangeable, and for some, or for others, it's definitions.
Where would Sovereign fit in?
I would say they're consortia, just because they're like a foundation, and like we work with Sovereign, but so do some of our competitors, and they're focused on identity, so they have like a common theme, which I wouldn't say, they're not necessarily a solution, but since they're compatible with different platforms, yeah, I would say consortia. Anyone else? Sovereign? Okay, we'll go with that. So this is a semi-Gartner Magic Quadrant, I guess, display of the digital positioning, and this is blockchain for developers. So this isn't necessarily what your line of business or your CIO might say, but this is for when they're logging on to use a platform. here's the feedback and the things that we've heard they're looking at. I would be interested if any of you are developers in here to call me out if these things aren't important to you or if they weren't a consideration. But I think that you can tell, like with Azure, they've done a great job of having this workbench, this dev kit. They give you a lot of resources and they hold your hand a lot. Whereas with something like, I guess you could say, an R3, they're giving you these resources, but they're tailoring it toward a certain industry. With AWS, they're fully managing your service. So if you're considering that as lack of decentralization, then that's a consideration. It's going to depend on how particular and how familiar you are with Hyperledger Fabric, but a lot of these platforms aren't necessarily running on the most recent version, which from the developers that I've spoken with is actually an area of interest and or concern because they're wanting to work on the most current version of the platform. So, that being said, the closer the relationship with Hyperledger Fabric in this instance, for the sake of this discussion, the better support that these different providers are going to have for the Fabric and for the consumers using it, more importantly, the developers. So, this is, once again, don't take my word for it, just an opinion and a perspective that we've seen and that came from a report, so it wasn't just made up at my desk.
Quick question, do you know when that report was conducted?
Honestly, I would probably say end of 2018. I don't think that looking into 2019 we would have had that resource yet. I can look for you, but that would be my guess.
Thank you. Is it Deloitte? Deloitte?
No, that one was Blue Mine, so it comes from a variety of sources. Yeah. Yes.
So we had TruffleCon here a couple of weeks ago, which is a conference that was focused on blockchain development and the tool sets that are available.
Yes.
I'm thinking a lot more about kind of from a DevOps perspective, the tooling that's available to not only build the software, but then also deploy and monitor.
Yes.
Have you seen trends in that space with what you're seeing at the enterprise level?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's why, like, a lot of the things that I had outlined for each one of them, that's what developers are calling out as important to them, is not just the underlying infrastructure or not just the time to value, it's really the how. Like when they sit down to write their smart contracts, what's going to make their life easier, and then once they deploy, what's going to allow them to scale without having to be concerned that it's not going to meet their company's needs. And I think that there's going to be more of a focus on that and less of a focus on all the flashy things and like talking about projects, at least for the remainder of 2019. Come 2020, I think we'll get past that and kind of know what tools are being, I guess, leveraged and which ones aren't necessarily a fan favorite, but I would say definitely an enterprise focus. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, going on that, TruffleCon, I actually spoke at that conference.
Okay.
I'm a security researcher, and actually, like, version 5, they have support for Hyperledger Fabric within it, so you can, like, wire it out using fabs similar to, like, how you would have Ethereum, like a Web3 connection. So, I don't know if that's because of, like, the enterprise Ethereum alliance that you guys are building, if we're going to see, like, a trend where these, like, where we're able to reuse these tools on multiple blockchains, and I don't know if you have any insight into that, if you see like enterprise devs instead of using like VS Code, which personally I don't like that much, having other tools.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say VS Code because that is the one I was going to use, because it's like we have one for our platform on Microsoft's marketplace, and so that's kind of an example of how it's the same tool offered on traditionally seen competitive platforms, but it can be more versatile. So ideally it'll expand beyond that, but that was my example. Okay, so these are basically just two trends to wrap up looking at first half 2019, being that major blockchain platforms made progress in not just improving and maturing their services, but also in releasing these new products, more specifically dev tools. And then there's a big focus on privacy consensus and digital asset standardization, which leads us into kind of the tokenization discussion that we'll have here shortly. So once again, if we wanted to be here all day, I think I could have taken all the different news that people are considering, but I tried to just focus on the ones that are most common and that are involving the definition of enterprise blockchain that I mentioned at the beginning. I've been really interested in learning more about Hyperledger Transact, so if anyone is more familiar with that, I'd love to talk to you after. I'm just trying to learn how exactly it's going to do what it promises, which is providing this transaction execution and state management. And I was glad to hear that when 1.4.3 was released this past Monday, it had a lot of bug fixes, but I have yet to kind of hear, like, I guess, trial and error experiences from people that use it on a daily basis. So I'm going to keep an eye out for that. Digital asset, open sourcing their modeling language, I thought was important to note. Pantheon, this is what is kind of the determining factor in whether or not Ethereum is going to join Hyperledger, is if this project is accepted. So keep an eye out for that. And then R3 releasing another version of their enterprise protocol and the token SDK just shows that although they are very deep in an industry, they're still progressing along similar trends of putting out these tools and tailoring to the enterprise. So when we're looking at Microsoft and ION more specifically, this project is newer to me, but I think that the Decentralized Identity Foundation is going to continue to come up more and more. And as I noted here, Microsoft's continuing to expand their dev kit, so they're putting time and energy into that because it's clearly a priority. Salesforce was built or is built on Hyperledger Sawtooth. There's really not that much information out there that I've been able to find, I think because it's still on the roadmap. But I'll be interested to see how different applications built on Sawtooth stack up, just because I think based on what I researched, it's been a little bit less successful than some of the other Hyperledger projects. But if any of you have had experience on it, I would love to hear about it. Nightfall is definitely more of an experiment. Once again, it leverages zero knowledge proof, but when you dig a bit more into it, it's really complex. And so I think it's an important call out just because EMY is a big player and may become bigger. But it's prior to Libra, it was a big move of a large corporation supporting cryptocurrency. So B3I, this is insurance, and then the Energy Web Foundation. I think that noting that it consists of 100 members, a lot of them that are big names, and you being in the energy space, I'm sure know a lot more about that. But I think these are all just things that are initiatives now that I think are going to grow into much bigger stories and consortia. There's one more slide like this. I promise I won't bore you anymore with all these bullet points. But for Global Shipping Business Network, I thought it was interesting that this came up more frequently, at least in my Google search, than TradeLens did, even though supposedly, or from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, TradeLens has 60% of the world's largest carriers for shipping containers, whereas this Global Shipping Business Network definitely has large container carriers, but we'll see who wins that race, or if they'll come together. That's kind of the question. Because I don't get why we're duplicating efforts if it's all for the same result. And same thing, there's two different healthcare groups right now working on basically the same problem, that we go into a doctor's office and we fill out paperwork 15 different times and give them way more information than we even know about ourselves if we're not looking at an immunization record or something like that. So I think the healthcare space is something that is going to benefit a lot more from blockchain once we get past all of the regulations, so in due time. And then last but not least was the trade finance piece. WeTrade obviously is the one that I'm most familiar with, but I think that Marco Polo and Voltron are both ones that are rapidly growing and are good to keep tabs on. I lied. I actually didn't remember that there was a fourth. I thought I took this one out. But this is more around consumer-facing type projects. With Louis Vuitton, I'm a big believer in using blockchain to prove authenticity, not just for luxury goods, but more so for counterfeit drugs, and just being able to verify that these things that we're either investing a lot of money in or trusting that it will cure someone's illness, we should be able to know as a consumer that it is what we think it is. And so I need to look more into the Louis Vuitton announcement, but I haven't heard much advancement in that project. I just know they're working on Ethereum with Microsoft. And then for Samsung, the fact that they already released a phone with a crypto wallet and a key store app, I think that's pretty cool. And for Food Trust, I talked to a few of you about it prior, but knowing that it also has kind of a blockchain for good component of being able to track food back to its source in what was 7 days and is now 2 seconds, just shows the efficiency that blockchain's bringing to all these industries. And then Walmart's kind of dipping its toes in a lot of different areas, but MetaLedger is focused on the drug supply chain. So a little bit similar to Food Trust in trusting what you're putting into your body, but a lot of times with this drug supply chain, there's a statistic that I think 7 out of 10 malaria drugs in developing countries are counterfeit. So we're wondering why there's so many epidemics with these illnesses, and a lot of times it's because the people probably aren't getting what they think they're getting. So to be able to verify that will have a large impact on worldwide health. So this is actually my last one of current initiatives, but there's a lot going on was the point of these slides, and a lot of players involved. So if you're not a large corporation, or even if you are, and you want to figure out what the heck's going on because it changes by the day, I think this tool is really unique. It is powered by Hyacera. IBM was a founding member, or is, I should say, and you can look up if you have an idea or you're working on some type of a solution and you want to see who else is doing it. It's essentially the yellow pages of blockchain projects. It's free to sign up for it. It's a great way where you can find other people that are working on the same thing that you are and then collaborate with them and just kind of compare notes. So I made a profile on it. Even though I don't have my own business venture, I'm still just enjoying keeping an eye on how much it's growing, and it's not just around Hyperledger. It's around all different protocols, and you can kind of filter it by protocol and by industry, and I check it out. I read. So this is the slide I was talking about earlier, kind of just showing that although the IBM Blockchain Platform started out as a Hyperledger Fabric only on IBM Cloud only product, it's really expanded and moved with the market and is becoming more true to the open source nature. And I really like the statistic that fewer than 40% of contributors to Hyperledger Fabric are IBMers, because since we donated a lot of the initial code, people think that IBMers are still the ones behind the code, and that's not the case. We are not the majority, and we are working on different projects. I know our digital identity solution is on Hyperledger Indy. There's been work with the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance around Burrow, so I'm excited to see how those come together. And then when we're looking at the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, Sovereign, and Stellar, those are all different groups that aren't necessarily this strict, private, permissioned, I guess, cookie cutter type engagement that we're branching out into, and IBM being as traditional as it is, I think it's important that we're kind of setting a precedent that all this interoperability has to happen if we really want this technology to take off and accomplish all that it can. So a plug on our next generation platform, which I spend my days talking, eating, sleeping about, I feel, and really just looking at what's the difference and why has it changed. And even since this slide was made, yesterday, the OpenShift capability was announced. So it will be generally available at the end of September, but that adds to our deploy anywhere value. And Hyperledger Fabric, this should say 1.4.3, and we're talking about kind of what Marissa was mentioning, where when you're building, governing, operating, and then eventually growing and scaling your network, having a single console that you can deploy on the environment of your choice is something that we gathered feedback on, and that this is what our current customers wanted, was this flexibility, and also not having to operate in a bunch of different screens and places and have to have different administrators monitoring each one. Now you can just go in the console. I was able to spin up my own network. I now understand Kubernetes. Like, there's a lot of moving parts behind all these networks, but to have a single place to do it is the true value of the platform. And I'm sorry that I don't know your name, but you're gonna love this next slide of, I always encourage people to start with the VS Code extension, because this is free. It's where you can see tutorials, sample code, really get a feel for what the platform is and isn't, and at no cost or real, time investment. But that's my advice as far as when people say, like, where do I begin? That would be it. Unless you don't like VS Code, then you can just get straight on the platform, but that takes a little bit more time. So, okay, into the fun part. I kind of want, by show of hands, of whether or not these research predictions you agree or disagree with. They get a bit more in depth as we go, because I feel like Gartner and IBC with these numbers, no one's going to be like, oh, I actually think it's 12.1 billion. But I just am wondering timeline-wise. So the first one, I know it's kind of small for those of you in the back, is worldwide spending on blockchain solutions will grow at a compound annual growth rate at 76%, and forecast that total spending amount to 12.4 billion in 2022. So that's what, 3 years from now? Thoughts? Show of hands if you think that is reasonable. Okay, so less than half, but I appreciate the optimists in the room. I tend to be more on the pessimist side, only because if you look back at some of these reports from years prior, they said that was going to be the reality, like now, or at least I saw a stat that was like 23 billion or something. I don't know. I hope that happens.
Do you know what the number is for this year?
Yeah.
I don't.
Last year? In a year?
Oh, no, I was going to say, wait, what? I have no idea what it is or what it was predicted to be. This is actually from a 2019 report, though, March of this year. So I have no idea what it is expected to be at this time this year, though.
So outside of the absolute number itself, the growth rate is just pretty high.
I agree.
And I, those are researchers. I'm sure I wonder if they're taking into account the fact that economy in general has been hot for a long time, and eventually it will cool down, and that will impact all the spending that enterprises have. 76% just seems like not taking those realities into account.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
I'd like to offer a counter. So, on the bigger scheme of things, it seems that packaged business software is kaput. People like SAP have got these large business suites, and they want you to move that into the cloud, and that's going on. But then they also want you to adopt their latest S4 or whatever edition it is in the cloud.
Yeah.
People are not really doing that. They're kind of happy once they've moved it to the cloud. But then there's an awful lot of pressures on corporations to do things like sharing of data. So how do corporations get sharing of data if they're not going to adopt these new packages from people like SAP? And so I think there's enough evidence there in things like Hyperledger Grid that companies are actually taking it into their own hands.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a fair observation, and I think it seems so simple, but it's like if we're trying to fast forward to 2022, all these things need to happen on a very quick timeline that historically haven't. So It's just interesting when IBC or Gartner kind of have different views, but also very rash predictions, in my opinion.
Just to give you the context, 1.5 billion last year, 3 billion this year, 6 billion in 2020, 2021, you're looking close to 12. So they're almost looking at a doubling effect to get to your number. But yes, it was 1.5 billion, according to IDC last year.
I wonder if there are corresponding graphs on cost of entry and risk of entry,
I'm
so
sure
that
there
more
are.
people come in as costs and risk decrease.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a reasonable assumption. I just don't know what point, like what's the tipping point for that? What is more people, or like, does it need to be worldwide movement? Because I know in other geographies, they're moving a lot quicker in certain industries because they don't have as many regulations as we do. And then vice versa, we might be moving quicker in some industries because we have less regulations than they do. And then as far as which sectors would be leading the way, financial obviously came first, followed by cross-border payments, settlements, and trade finance. That is for most investment in 2019. I would say in 2020 it would be something more like healthcare, government, and just more of the public sector initiatives, or even retail, travel and transportation, things like that. I don't know that there'll be as much focus on just strictly finance. For Gartner, by 2021, 90% of current enterprise blockchain platform implementations will require replacement within 18 months to remain competitive, secure, and avoid obsolescence. Looking at you, Philip. Anyway, so I think that 90% is a bit extreme, and 18 months is a pretty short timeline. But I would like to open that up for anyone else's opinion.
Doesn't say they'll actually replace it.
Right, right, true. Yes.
I think that's 100% true. Like everything that they're doing now with private consortiums has to be completely rehashed. Especially there's kind of a diverging shift of do we go public with anonymous things? Do we link consortiums? Like even now, like things in chains get out of date within like 6 months, and they have no idea how to fork them.
You see, outside of blockchain itself, enterprise applications, for them, for enterprise applications themselves, this is really not a prediction, it's a reality. Most of the enterprise applications, within 18 months, you need to redo them. The business realities change, and you have to do something about them. So, this is hardly a prediction. This is what will happen anyway.
Right, but do we think it's to the same extent that blockchain, like they're saying their blockchain platform implementation will require replacement, like it's not just upgrade, it's like full-on replacement. I guess that's the word that was like kind of stumping me, was I was like, whoa, they're gonna wipe and start over.
And especially given the flux that the industry is in right now, in terms of how the industry is progressing, things will change for sure a lot.
And there's a lot of hyperbole in that statement, right? It says, will require replacement to remain competitive, secure, and avoid obsolescence. I mean, that's
Classic research statement though.
Right, I mean, it's hard to apply other.
So that is still true, even if they're like, oh, we'll just take out that one word and then we will.
Saying a lot, not really saying anything.
I know. Yeah. And this kind of just backs it up, but the senior research director from Gartner says that many CIOs overestimate the capabilities and short-term benefits, and that creates an unrealistic expectation when assessing the offering. So from experience, not that I've sat down with too many CIOs directly, but I would say that this statement is true.
Can
Yes.
I add to this? One of the missions we have as industry is to educate still. Because these guys, they know what blockchain is and how it can, how it works and all these, but they still don't make the link between an operational problem and a blockchain solution. And that's where we have to do something. That's going to be key for the future. But that's an industry. That's not only Hyperledger, it's everywhere.
Oh, for sure.
I don't see that link yet.
Yeah.
And we have to come with still killer applications where they will see that value. That is
I agree.
As long as we don't have, because it's still not out there. You still don't see the line.
Well, I think it's out there. It's cluttered with a lot of other things.
Yeah, they don't see a real application. What does it bring? Because they're looking for increased sales, less costs, increased efficiencies, and all these. And you have to show it clear how it's going to help.
Yeah, and I think a lot of projects haven't been in production long enough to show that just yet. And so when you're looking at what's going to work for your business, you're just thinking of hypotheticals and like you don't have any fact to base it on because it's still too new. This one's interesting, I think, because E&Y, who, mind you, their initiative that I called out was Nightfall, is trying to put together an entire suite of capabilities, including audit and security, that would allow an enterprise to say, yes, we're comfortable, we can do secure, private, reliable, and regulatory compliant business transactions on a public network. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of thoughts go through my head when I see this. I've been in InfoSec, so it's like, for me, like, especially like knowing EY, it's like, okay, they're gonna create just like some sort of like token taxonomy like framework, but it's not gonna have any like implementation or hold any weight. So they can say like this, but in practice, this is like extremely difficult to do, and I would not be optimistic of anyone achieving this.
I completely agree.
So you're saying they might need auditors?
These were all quotes that, like, as I'm doing research, I'm like, wait, this person's from what company? Like, you'd think this was just like someone's like LinkedIn post or like food for thought, and it's like, no, these are like backed by large corporations of people saying these things that like, I was like, am I just like, it's a Monday, am I being a pessimist? Like, no, I agree.
They have a proof of concept shipping, so, you know, they just extrapolate from there, you know?
Yeah, literally.
We've done a POC, it must work.
Yep. And so this is from a Quorum white paper. By building on Ethereum, Quorum inherits the maturity of the production hardened Go Ethereum code base, as well as helps unite the public and enterprise development communities on a common protocol. In my mind, I kind of had this scale of like Hyperledger Quorum kind of going in my head, and I'm interested to hear what everyone thinks. Lots of confusion on faces. Yeah.
Does that mean they also inherit the scale? The scalability? Or lack thereof?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. It's a nice asterisk that should be in the bottom corner. Yeah.
Does that mean that they will put business data on Ethereum? Is that what they're going to do?
Sounds like it.
That's the whole thing. Ethereum is a great platform, but the only safety net you have is encryption. We all know that encryption is going to weaken over time, and the problem will go up, and your business data will be out there. If it's crypto keys, no one cares, but if it's a PII, you might be in trouble.
That's the developers coming. Ethereum has a large number of
Quorum on the
What
course
is
like
that?
Hyperledger, they have a private transaction system separate to the public transaction system.
Okay.
So they exchange transactions only to the two parties, with, X amount of parties.
Okay, yeah. So it's not really building on it. It's not really on Ethereum.
Yeah, it's a fork of Ethereum.
It's a fork of
Fork, okay, yeah.
But they have a lot of challenges in security, and they themselves say we have a problem, which they're trying to address.
Yeah.
It's also undetermined the future of that client, because Ethereum is moving to ETH 2.0, and all the ETH 1.0 clients are all going to kind of be caught in the dust as time passes. And Quorum's core feature is an ETH 1.0 client. It's not compliant with sharding or any of that in the future.
At what point do we have too many forks? Right? Is the fork replace? It's just this cycle of we're forking. Management of all of it seems like it's going to be very, very difficult. We're putting ourselves out there further. So that scares me.
Right. That is and it doesn't really work.
Forking really doesn't matter. Even you and I can fork it, but it all comes down to adaptability. And the more developers and more complex consumers, it has to be. That's very definitely. I can fork Ethereum and make my own mind.
Yes, there should be some adoption.
Yeah. And you could get huge adoption, and then the other ports just
Yeah,
shrill.
the largest blocks and all those ones, yes.
And then I saw this and I was like, well, that's timely for the discussion. Like I did, yeah, I'll be very interested to see the likelihood of this happening, and the fact that it's resting on the acceptance of Pantheon is, it seems like it's a very, I guess, specific contingency. But I don't know if anyone has insider knowledge on this.
So Ethereum is a member of Hyperledger, right? Pretty sure that they've announced that.
Yes. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
Hyperledger is on the Ethereum.
Yeah.
Right.
Wait, but it's the other way around though, right?
Oh,
Well,
No, it's
Because
both.
this was literally August 22nd. So was it in the past?
It was in the past.
so they're on the standards bodies.
The
yeah.
EDA.
So they sit on each other's standards bodies.
Right.
This is about an actual deployment.
Yes, yes, okay, sorry, I was missing the standards body piece, but I mean, yeah, this
So
was
it's
from, what,
deployment on Hyperledger, oh, sorry.
like a week ago.
Oh, I was just gonna ask a question, what makes it a public blockchain?
That is $1 million question. No, in my opinion, the public blockchain is something that can be accessed or is visible to anyone, but whether or not there's a permissioning involved, like if there's like a code to entry, that's kind of where the like permission versus non-permission, like, 'cause there could be a private I'm mixing them up. There can be a public permissioned network, so it exists out there. It's just a matter of if you need a permission or not to view it. That would be my answer, but I don't think that's the best way to respond. So, if anyone else.
Could you not just argue that Ethereum is already satisfying this? Yes.
What do you mean? Is that they're not already in Hyperledger?
Well, they're part of the Hyperledger.
Yeah. I don't understand what's new here.
They're trying to connect the actual Ethereum public network. All the other previous
So-
ones, it runs Ethereum, but it's not connected to the public network. So like Sawtooth doesn't connect to the Ethereum public network, but it runs Ethereum smart contracts. And it runs the Ethereum virtual machine. And it has support for it, it doesn't actually connect to the public network.
And Burrow provides a way to have them talk. Like Project Burrow, another Hyperledger, one of the 11, allows the talking between. And now can I execute a public blockchain network in a permission environment?
Yeah, and with this, so like Pantheon, for those of you who are not familiar, it's a Java-based like Ethereum client. So that'll essentially maybe facilitate some of the communication that exists between, Hyperledger and like Ethereum now. But there are some like high-level integrations that do exist today. But I guess having a full Ethereum client in Java will allow them to, do more than they can currently support.
That's even more than I knew about it. I more just saw the headline and was like, wait, what? I need to look into this because this could signify a lot of change coming. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes, and I think this will be a good way to kind of wrap up this conversation. And it's all around the idea of tokenization and the fact that a lot of these blockchain-based projects have an element of tokenization in them. When we're looking at the token taxonomy initiative, and I'll come back to this slide, but this was the quote that won them all for me, and it was, the purpose of this initiative is to clearly define a token in non-technical, cross-industry terms using real-world analogies so that anyone can understand them, which I was like, wow. In a perfect world, this would definitely happen. In this world, first of all, that involves understanding blockchain. Second of all, it involves understanding digital assets. And then you get to tokenization. So, for the seemingly impossible ask, I kind of want to see, if you go back in your same groups as before, how would you meet the Token Taxonomy Initiative mission, like that is included in their mission statement, to define a token or tokenization, come up with an analogy, and then describing the use case, that's only if you have time, because we had issues with 2 truths and a lie, so we're just gonna focus on the top 2, but being able to define it so that anyone, your grandma, your cousin, whoever, could understand tokens and tokenization with an analogy. That's the challenge that I kind of want to end on. And then we'll vote. I don't know if there's any prizes, but I mean, just pride is a good thing to walk out with. So, ready, go. You have 6 minutes. Yeah, if you want. Unless you got scared off from your group, you can. There are rights to leave. Have fun. Oh yeah, sorry. We did a group activity. We did 2 truths and a lie, and it was way more complicated than I ever anticipated.
I just want to say thanks to the chat. I really enjoyed meeting you.
No, of course. No worries. Just reach out with any questions or if you want me to send you information.
I did take down your
Perfect. Yeah, no, good luck with everything.
Yeah, I would say no more about the really cool applications as I see the safety
I was
and
going to say more of the
supply chain.
This was a bit deeper to join.
Oh, I'm new to it. I'm getting myself challenged with all these new meetups are great. I live here downtown, so I can go to anyone I want.
The thing too is like, just traveling and walking on cycles, but some people have had real experience with that. I haven't.
Does your website have an expectation of bringing something back from these?
I do this, because I'm not in a sales position, it's not like no, so how much revenue.
Well, no, more like, what is the field looking like where you were talking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes me more knowledgeable,
Yeah.
like, to go back and hear, like, conversations, what we're putting, like, all of our priorities on, what if that's not changed? Like, what if in different markets?
It's taking on my cell phone, tiny notes to remind me to that up later, okay, hit that up later.
Yeah, no, and that's, I
Yeah.
think community of readers, so thank you for coming.
Thank you for this. Enjoy our weather.
Yes, no, seriously, I will be outdoors for the next 3 days.
Oh, yeah.
I'll sleep outside.
Yeah, lots of stuff still going on. We haven't shut down for the winter yet, so bumper shoes and all these other
I
things.
know, I asked my sister, I'm like, can we do some like more touristy things? Because she's lived here for a while now, but we never really like.
I don't go anymore. I don't go across the street from it. I can play some bumper shoes and have some classes. I just wander all day on Seattle Center's campus. It costs too much money.
Right.
It's like, I don't need to go up into the area.
Right.
It's
Something to
lot going on. Yeah.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Each year there's some big names that show up on the page. Go to anything going on.
Yeah, definitely worthwhile. And we have a few family members coming in that have never been here, so we'll have to check it out. Thanks again. Nice meeting you. No, don't worry about it. Just shoot me an email or add your LinkedIn, but I want to hear about what you're up to, so thanks for coming. I'm sad that you'll miss this, okay.
So the way you do things a lot easier. You know, they are what they are. They're not anything else. But if they're a building or a place or a farm or you know, the big question is how do you make sure those things sync to the I don't know. Figure it out.
This came from this place and it could not have come from anywhere else. So if the person on the other end, if I tell the person on the other end, that you know that this came from me and nobody else.
I think, in my perspective, the token is I was the only person that could buy this.
Yes.
So you buying this?
Yeah, so I'm just
buying our token.
One use case, or moving these
Here's this person.
Papers kind of using some sort of token system.
But also
Converting to US dollars. Inside a corporation could have a scenario where you have like a budget.
Yes,
You think
I
efficiently
do like
you use so much compute. So it's,
You extend that to your departmental budgets, right? I mean, the funny money, you pass along, somebody types it into a spreadsheet and so forth. It's just as easy to use a technical representation of it and have the benefits of the ledger, the readability, and the history.
Do you have an analogy?
It's a good everyday tool or technology, whatever.
If the, what's the, how certain members of the
Tokenize something right now.
with next election, we might end up like tokenizing
The bank account, your bank account, money.
So all of a sudden, like, you say, whatever you
On the one end, like, we have a few million credit cards that aren't guys or anybody, but once they're assigned to
Yeah, it's probably just that.
Originally, the card isn't just going to be
tokenize every building.
One minute.
Look up who that number card is supposed to be tied to. That's similar to the process of tokenization that you're using on a site.
The concept there is taking something physical, attaching some sort of token to it, and then making it
Well, I would say,
I mean, for example, one interesting thing is, you think about all the work we do around digital identity.
Well, yeah,
Analog, and how to represent
the systems integration.
One could argue that I have the summation of all my interactions or assets. So I get a driver's license, I get a school, I visit a store, all these things that you represent, I get my identity token.
Yeah, you could.
So that data aspect. No, they determine who I'm sure it is.
Okay,
I might have
time's
trouble
up.
monetizing it.
Just so we have enough
But it
time to share and vote
represents,
and get out of here before we get locked
You
in.
know,
Yeah.
your physical.
Although this view will be lovely, we don't.
Speaker left.
Yeah, right? You're like, no, come back. You guys can go last.
It was so good.
Yeah?
Oh, no.
I mean, he has a lot of good things to say. All right, who's up first? We'll go in reverse order. If anyone's part of the group that didn't go last time,
And you had a good analogy. Yeah.
I'm not really good at that. Just define token or tokenization. I guess it's a way to model a transaction. Like it's very vague, but it's like any type of exchange of value between two people or two parties. That item in between kind of is a token. So
Okay.
like an analogy for a token and tokenizations is like, I don't know, like money. I mean, money is like stock. Stock is a pretty good one.
Okay.
Stock is both fungible and non-fungible, right? Like people's shares are unique. At the same time, they're worth some value. You can like give it to someone else. Like another way, honestly, like another way, if you think of like a token, could be like literally like favors, for example. Like non-fungible tokens are like favors. People exchange like favors. They barter back in the day, and that's kind of what crypto is doing, right? You can trade any item as long as it's unique, and that's kind of what the supply chain industry is doing. Like you can trade an apple, and that could be a token, right? It's just a digital representation of an apple. And that's if you think of like Hyperledger, like she mentioned Hyperledger as one of the pilots. Like they trade drugs and they use 721. They use tokens. They model a drug as a token and they trade it between two people to show which hands they have exchanged.
perfect. Okay, that was option one, so just remember that you're option one when people are voting. Who's option two? Kurt's group in the back.
We really answered it, yeah.
Guys.
I guess we answered all of them. Guess who's gonna talk for it?
Okay, then maybe Philip should go last so that if anyone gets locked in.
I can try a bit video. So definition, to me, it's a means of exchange.
Okay.
A digital means of exchange.
Yep.
That has value that has access to services or something of value. But it's a reward based on something that has been done. That's very.
And then an analogy
Bitcoin. Look at Bitcoin. It's worth today, let's say, $2 trillion. No sales team, no marketing team, no HR, no legal. Just because of incentives.
Okay.
To me, Bitcoin is an analogy.
Okay.
And a use case is,
We can just go.
tokenization. You can
Yeah.
fractionalize real estate, create, or art. You can fractionalize art.
I like those.
Tokenize it, create totally new business models based on token.
Okay.
That's,
Option 2 from Philip, everyone. All right, we have 2 more groups, I think, before we vote.
I'll go.
Yeah.
So I have a slightly different take on it. I think that tokens are a digital representation of a thing, whether it's a physical thing, like a pill or an apple or something, or whether it's a digital thing like a cryptocurrency. But it's something that is then recorded on a ledger that you can use to transact some things that are transacting value. One of the things we were talking about was if you look at identity in terms of, say, a token, right? You can make the argument that your identity is something that is built up over your lifetime through a series of interactions. I get a driver's license, I go to school, I go to this particular, movie at this particular time, and so forth. So I've got this token, digital token that represents that. Is that in and of itself valuable? Well, some people might monetize that. Amazon might monetize that. I might not have the ability to monetize it. So when I think of token, I think of it more as something that represents rather than an activity.
Okay. Option 3. Now we have one last
You
option.
need an analogy, right? Or did I miss the analogy?
The registration of your home, in the county ledger, except that by virtue of the fact that it's digital, immutable, and you have the whole history, you have a much richer representation of the life of that physical asset.
Totally fair. All right, we have one last group. Seth is back.
You don't want to go?
You're back from reversing?
Okay.
You had a minute?
Okay, so I would define the process of tokenization as the process of creating digital scarcity. And the analogy we came up with was, if you think of like a bunch of blank credit cards, they don't really mean anything until you assign it to a person who has like a credit history and identity. So sort of in the same way, on the internet, it's hard the internet lets us create information and share it with each other, but it doesn't give us a way to tell where information came from. The way you solve that problem is through scarcity. So like if I write an email and send it to somebody, it could be intercepted along the way, or somebody could write a similar email, make it seem like it came from them, but if I tokenize it and make it scarce, then there's a way for me to say this email came from me and nobody else.
Perfect. That was option 4. Okay, so by show of...
Participation, come on. Let's do participation. Everybody wins here.
Oh, I wanted to see a winner. I'm a competitive person.
We only have one prize.
I was going to say, I knew Marissa said she had a prize. There was thought behind this, you guys. I knew someone... Okay, so for option 1, which was the analogy of the stock market, raise your hand. I guess we should close our eyes if we're doing this elementary style so we don't hurt anyone's feelings. But 1 vote. Okay. Option 2, which was Philip's explanation. And you have to vote for something. Option 3, which was the house registry. You gotta vote for your own idea. You got 4? Okay, and then option 4, which was just the blank credit cards. That's what I voted for, but... So I think it was option 3, the house registry. So yeah, there we go. If you didn't vote, that was just your loss.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, and we ended with 2 minutes to spare, but thank you guys all for coming, participating. I found it to be a really exciting discussion, so hope you guys learned something, and reach out to me if you want to talk more.
And our next Meetup will be back here on September 25th with David Holding from Microsoft. So, come back here.
Thanks, Marissa, for having me. Yeah, thanks so much for coming and volunteering. You're so helpful. Yes. Yes.